Imagine building a brand so ubiquitous that it owns 90% of an entire global market. A company whose influence is so absolute, people stop saying they are taking photographs and instead say they are capturing Kodak moments. Then imagine watching that empire collapse. A Kodak engineer invented the technology that would eventually destroy the company. Kodak executives knew exactly what they had. They buried the invention. They feared that letting go of the profits they were already making would lead to their own demise. When this 132-year-old titan filed for bankruptcy in 2012, it created the ultimate corporate paradox. Kodak did not fail because it was suddenly disrupted. It failed because it actively sprinted away from its own future. To understand the depth of that trap, we have to look back to 1880. A young bank clerk named George Eastman saw a severe limitation in early photography. It required hauling heavy glass plates and toxic chemicals into the field. Eastman wanted to democratize the process. In 1888, he launched the first Kodak camera. It came loaded with enough film for 100 shots. Customers simply pressed the button, then mailed the entire camera back to Kodak, who developed the photos, reloaded the device, and returned it. It was a complete end-to-end camera-as-a-service system. Eastman had successfully deployed the razor and blades economic model. By selling cheap, highly accessible cameras, he locked generations of consumers into a lifetime cycle of purchasing high-margin film. The sheer scale of this monopoly is staggering. By the late 20th century, Kodak controlled roughly 85% of all camera sales and 90% of all photographic film sold in the United States. This chart shows the structural trap created by that extreme success. The tiny sliver at the bottom represents hardware sales. That massive column towering over it illustrates the roughly 70% gross profit margins generated exclusively by film. Operating a machine this profitable made pivoting to an unproven model unthinkable. The anomaly arrived in 1973. A 23-year-old engineer named Steve Sasson was hired by Kodak and assigned to experiment with a new type of electronic sensor known as a charge-coupled device. Over 2 years, Sasson scavenged parts from around the lab, a movie camera lens, a portable cassette recorder, and 16 batteries. He wired them together into an 8-pound toaster-sized prototype. The contraption proved a radical concept. It could capture light digitally, store it electronically, and display the image on a screen without a single drop of chemical processing. By modern standards, it was laughable. It took 23 seconds to record a heavily pixelated 0.01 megapixel black and white image to a cassette tape. Yet the core architecture for modern digital imaging was fully functioning. In December 1975, Kodak owned a functioning prototype for the next age of photography. They possessed a 10-year technological head start on the rest of the industry. In 1976, Sasson carried his bizarre machine into a corporate boardroom. He pointed the box at the executives, snapped their photos, connected the cassette to a television set, and showed them their faces instantly on the screen. The executives understood the technology. What terrified them was the underlying math. Commercializing a camera that required no physical materials would immediately cannibalize their massive recurring film revenue. Look at this visualization of the innovator's dilemma. We see two intersecting trend lines: the rapid ascent of digital disruption, crossing directly through a collapsing line of legacy profits. Extreme success creates an environment where dominant companies struggle to intentionally disrupt themselves. At this intersection, leadership faced a choice: commercialize digital imaging and dismantle their billion-dollar film business, or protect the legacy empire and hope digital remained a niche novelty. They chose the latter. Management instructed SAS to keep the invention a secret. Protecting short-term quarterly earnings became the exact mechanism that poisoned their long-term survival. While Kodak leadership aggressively guarded their film monopoly, the walls began to crack from the outside. Japanese rival Fujifilm started mass-producing cheaper film, undercutting Kodak's prices in massive retail chains like Walmart. Then came a massive legal blow. Kodak had entered the instant photography market and was sued by Polaroid for patent infringement. In 1990, they were ordered to pay over $900 million, draining crucial capital right as the digital transition accelerated. Kodak did eventually attempt a digital pivot in the late 90s. They built some of the earliest digital SLRs, but without the high-margin film ecosystem attached, the hardware alone was completely unprofitable for them. When Apple released the iPhone in 2007, the focus shifted from the camera itself to the software ecosystem surrounding it. Photography became a background feature of a multi-purpose device, where the value lived in instant sharing rather than physical prints. This ecosystem bypassed Kodak's entire chemical and retail infrastructure. By the time leadership realized the standalone camera market was collapsing, the industry was no longer defined by how light was captured, but by how data was distributed across networks. Faster driving pace. The early 2000s became a sprint of desperate measures. Kodak halted traditional film camera sales in Western markets, executed tens of thousands of layoffs, and began auctioning off the very digital patents that could have secured their future. The financial metrics paint a brutal picture. A company that peaked at a $28 billion valuation violently crashed to near zero value, buried under $6.8 billion in liabilities. The economic toll materialized into physical decay. A corporate ecosystem that once employed over 140,000 people hollowed out into empty space. In January 2012, 132 years of history officially ended. Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Dominance breeds a culture of preservation. When an entire corporate structure, and every job inside of it, depends entirely on the status quo remaining intact, no one is going to cast a vote for revolution. Kodak's internal identity was tethered to chemical film, overlooking their broader role in memory preservation. If leadership understood their true purpose, they could have embraced the digital transition as a natural evolution, rather than an enemy to be fought. That is the defining irony of Kodak. They were not destroyed by an unpredictable competitor. They were destroyed by an absolute refusal to utilize the survival tools sitting quietly in their own filing cabinet.